Welcome to Rotoviz Radio. You are listening to episode 42. My name is John Moore, and with me is Davis Maddock. Davis, how are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm trying to forget the Dallas game, but other than that, I'm doing all right. How about you?
I'm doing well, man. Stay strong, brother. There's light ahead.
There is.
So this is episode 42, the Ronnie Lott episode. I don't know if you know this, Davis. Do you have a guess for how many Pro Bowls Ronnie Lott went to?
12.
He went to 10, and he was a 6-time first-team All-Pro, the best ever to wear the number 42, and that's why we're honoring him here today. So before we get into things, I want to say thanks to last week's guests, Bill Connolly from Football Study Hall and Danny Kelly from Field Goals. It was a fantastic episode. Really enjoyed that one. And then looking at this week's episode, we've got two great guests. Up first, we've got Pete Damilatis, who you know on Twitter at PFF_Pete. He's going to break down the NFL playoffs. And then we have, following him, Shane P. Hallam to talk the College Football National Championship and his work with the upcoming NFL Draft. Really fantastic episode. But first, Davis, let's look back on the week that was in football. What's something that caught your eye?
You know, the point that I wanted to talk about was that eventually, at some point, the fact that the Seahawks don't have one above average wide receiver is going to hurt them. Right now, they have the benefit of an amazing defense, mostly as a result of the fact that they have an all-pro quarterback at a rookie salary. But once they have to pay Wilson, and that defense maybe starts to take a little bit of a hit, or maybe it comes on the offensive line or something like that. The fact that they don't have one above replacement level wide receiver, Curse is okay, but I'd say he's about replacement level. It's going to cause problems down the road. Interesting.
Yeah, and I'll stick with that same game for this upcoming NFC title game. Aaron Rodgers. It was really striking to me, and maybe I'm imagining this, but it felt like the Cowboys were almost daring the Packers and Rodgers to beat them. It felt like let's keep Lacey quiet. Let's see what Rodgers really has, health-wise. And, obviously it bit them in the long run, but the Cowboys were right there for 4 quarters. And it'll be really interesting to see which of the poisons, Seattle tries to slow down with offense. Do they, key a little bit more in the run game, or they let it go with Rodgers and see if, like the Cowboys, if Rodgers can beat them?
I think the best thing for Green Bay to do is to just if Lacey isn't able to get it going early, like running for 1 yard on first down every time when they get the ball back, and that's what the Cowboys do, right? Like that gets them in a hole. They end up in lots of second and long and third and long because they run on first down more than any team in football. So I just don't think that's the way that Green Bay should go about it this weekend.
Mm-hmm. Anything else, Davis?
I think that I need to publicly offer a little bit of a mea culpa on Odell Beckham. I was just not really a fan of him, especially given the cost that you needed to acquire him. Definitely not what the Giants paid for him. I think, and we talked about this a little bit in email earlier this year, but it was just a little bit of missing the forest for the trees with the fact that he only scored 2 touchdowns in the SEC. But he does have that world-class athleticism. But I still think to this day, I would take Evans over him. And this will probably be Odell Beckham's best fantasy point per game production of his entire career.
You'd have to think so, or else he's going to be rewriting all sorts of record books in the fantasy game and real life.
He'll end up being too expensive in dynasty drafts and redrafts for my taste, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think on my end, we were talking before we hit record about, like, even deep into August, seeing him go second round in rookie drafts, wasn't unusual. And I don't really know what to say. I thought of him kind of as a Macklin-ish prospect. Could be a really great number 2. But I'm with you, Davis, on the mea culpa, and Ryan McDowell and Terrence out there listening were with me on draft night when the Giants picked him at 13, and my reaction was, I guess, pretty funny. But speaking of the draft, we are just one day away as you listen to this from the underclassmen declaration deadline. We're going to start turning our attention to that, obviously finishing out the NFL playoff strong, but also really gearing up for draft content in the coming weeks. We've got a great slate of guests lined up. It's really an exciting time for football. I think for me and Matt, at least, Davis, I don't know where you stand on this. This is our favorite time of the year when we get to really dig into the rookies. And
absolutely.
Yeah. A lot of fun. So with that, let's get to the episode. As I mentioned, up first, we've got Pete Damilatis to talk about the NFL playoffs. And then following that, we've got Shane P. Hallam to talk about the college football championship and the NFL draft. Let's do it. Please welcome to the show, Pete Damilatis, who you can find on Twitter at PFF_Pete. He's an analyst and writer for Pro Football Focus, a Boston College Eagle, and he is still looking for that dare to be great dream situation. Pete, how are you?
Doing well, guys. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. Thank you for being here. Just to jump right into the action, you were an all-star tweeter in covering the playoffs over the weekend. What stood out to you most in the 4 divisional playoff games?
Well, I think, everyone on Monday wanted to talk about the controversial Cowboys ending. But the thing that struck me most from a X's and O's standpoint was the Colts upset over the Broncos was something I just really did not see coming. When I was making my picks for the weekend, thinking, okay, like the 2 teams I felt most confident about were the Seahawks and the Broncos. I just thought, I guess maybe this is just my bias from the beginning of the season and looking at the Colts roster and not having a lot of faith about them throughout the season. I just kind of thought like their story was already written. They have, the best quarterback in a division full of terrible quarterbacks, and they have a, decent roster, but not a great roster. And, they're going to go through, win the AFC South, beating up on teams, the Jaguars and the Titans twice a year. They're going to host a playoff game, beat someone like, last year the Chiefs, this year the Bengals. And I thought they were going to be, summarily dismissed by the top tier of the AFC out of the Broncos or the Patriots. And this weekend, I mean, they definitely proved me wrong. It just seems like, when you look at their roster, there's, the defense particularly, there's not anyone that really jumps out to me other than, Vontae Davis, who's having, one of the best seasons by, a cornerback in the league this year. But it just, they seem to be better than the sum of their parts. And, how they put it together this weekend to stifle the Broncos. And the Broncos, they shot themselves in the foot plenty of times. But I was just really impressed with, them pulling that big upset on the road. I just didn't think that was a step that they were going to be able to take this year. And it came away pretty surprised.
Yeah, it's almost kind of interesting. Like, as you were talking then, it almost felt like you were describing a 2004 Peyton Manning Colts team in a way. You know what I mean? Like, they've got the star quarterback, but then around that, it's just, what else do they really have? Certainly interesting weapons, but points there. Davis, did you have a quick something to say?
Yeah, I just thought that the Broncos were giving way too many points in that game. I think the spread ended at 9.5. And given everything that we'd seen from Manning, the entire month and a half before, it was just looking like his arm gave out on him and they were trying to save him using CJ Anderson. I didn't have the intestinal fortitude to pick the Broncos straight up, but I definitely thought that the Colts were going to keep it closer than a touchdown. But Manning ended up looking even worse. Do you think that was a result of injury or fatigue? And do you think this is Manning's last season?
The one thing that makes me think it's not his last season, because all signs are pointing to him being done now. Just the way it ended, how hurt or beat up, or how he just didn't look like Peyton Manning for basically the second half of the season. And even his post game comments, we're to see how everything shakes down with the coaches. And then, of course, the day later, half the coaching staff, or the entire coaching staff, is pretty much gone. So you wonder, okay, that's it. But I just feel like for a guy who takes so much pride in the game and football is his life, and I just find it hard to believe that he's going to let his legacy end on such a disappointing, sad game against the team who let him go. I feel like there's something inside him that he's just going to say, look, I'm not going to let this end this way. And, is he going to come back and go back to, top quarterback Peyton Manning, MVP candidate? I don't think so, but I think he will come back and try to at least finish the story in some other way that isn't so, Marino-esque in the way it ended.
Yeah. Let's get into a few of the questions, a few of the games. Looking at the Packers-Cowboys game, Des Bryant had that crucial fourth down reception / non-reception. There was a lot of debate over that in the following days. What do you make of that play, and what do you think about the league's rules as far as what's a reception and a football move and all that kind of stuff?
What stings me the most about this is we all saw the Calvin Johnson touchdown, 7 years ago, and the NFL, it looked like a catch. They said it wasn't a catch. They said it was the right call, which this was. This is the right call. The rule is just horrible, and you just knew that it was going to come up again in an even bigger spot, and here it is. And now, the NFL is talking about maybe changing it, but it's so reactive to me, because after you saw that Calvin Johnson thing 7 years ago, why wouldn't you want to try to get ahead of it and be a little proactive and change the rule? I think the biggest problem with it is that so much of it depends on what they call a football move, but no one even knows what a football move is. You go to the rule book. I actually I tweeted this the other day, an excerpt from the rule book, and they say, well, an act common to the game, which is if the receiver makes an act common to the game, like a pitch or forward motion, etc. Like that, etc. It's like it could be whatever you want it to be. So who knows what a football move is? And the problem is that they're trying to define something that's indefinable. So you could say, oh, well, a football move is a lunge. Well, what is a lunge? If the guy turns around and sticks a ball out like 2 inches, extends his arm the whole way? Or what if, a guy, he catches a pass, he gets 2 feet on the ground, and if he turns 90 degrees and the ball pops out, is that a catch and a fumble? No one seems to know what a football move is. So I said, let's just simplify it. If you want to make a rule, black and white, objective, take it, you have to catch the ball, have control, and get 3 feet down on the ground. If you're near the sideline, 2 feet in bounds, and then when the next foot comes down out of bounds, that's it. If you have 3 feet down and then you stumble and the ball pops out of your hands when you're, way out of bounds, then that's still a catch because you caught the ball. Just because you're reaching or trying to make the play, you shouldn't get penalized for that. So it's just unbelievable how the NFL has just kind of overcomplicated this rather than keeping it simple, stupid.
Yeah, as a Dallas Cowboys fan, I just want to forget that game happened as quickly as possible. But sticking with the Packers, Davante Adams obviously had a huge game against the Cowboys, but the Cowboys secondary is pretty different from the Seahawks secondary, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see Adams lined up with Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb. How do you see that matchup between Green Bay's elite wide receivers and Seattle's secondary unfolding?
I mean, I think it's going to be the most crucial matchup in the game, and I think it's going to look drastically different from week one because, if you remember, the Packers strategy for that game was, okay, Richard Sherman, he's great. We know he's going to lock down whoever we have, so let's put Jarrett Boykin out on the right side. He'll face off against Richard Sherman, and then, we can have Jordy work against some of the other cornerbacks who are, and Randall Cobb work against some of the other cornerbacks who are, a little bit weaker than Sherman is. The problem with that strategy was Sherman just locked down Boykin all by himself. The Seahawks didn't move him, but that was fine because they were able to leave him out there, and all of a sudden the Packers are playing 10 on 10 in a much smaller field. So I think that now going from Boykin to Adams, a guy who could, has the skill to, beat Sherman at least once in a while, not like Boykin who didn't get a single target that game. It's like he wasn't even on the field. I think that's going to be a huge help for the Packers, and I think that also looking another crucial point is Byron Maxwell's a little banged up. They had Thorold Simon in there for the Seahawks opposite Sherman, and he got burned for over 100 yards last game by the Panthers. It wasn't just Calvin Benjamin burning him. It was Olsen burning him. There was a number of different guys burning him. So I think that with the upgrade from Jarrett Boykin from week one to Davante Adams now, and being able to maybe move those guys around and even single in on Thorold Simon there on opposite Sherman, I just think that that the Packers could have a lot more success in their passing game than they did back in September.
All right, so shifting to another aspect of the Green Bay passing game, the Seahawks, only 2 teams gave up more touchdowns to tight ends than the Seahawks. Do you think that there's a particular reason that they're vulnerable to tight ends, or was it just that they were missing Byron Maxwell and some of their safeties earlier in the year? But do you see Quarles and Richard Rodgers having a big game against the Seahawks?
I really don't. And I know those guys have come through with some big plays for the Packers, in some key moments. But I think that the Seahawks' troubles against tight ends are sort of a thing of the past. I wasn't able to go through every game and see, when's the last time they give a touchdown to tight end, but I don't think it's been for a while. And even last week, they faced Greg Olsen, who's one of the best receiving tight ends in the game. And he was able to only get 58 yards on them, so without a touchdown. So I think that a lot of it was early in the season. They just kind of were a bit discombobulated. Antonio Gates, a lot of those touchdowns came in that Antonio Gates 3-touchdown game against them in week 2. And then, obviously, as you mentioned, they had the injuries to some key guys in the middle, like even a Bobby Wagner and Maxwell and Cam Chancellor and even Jeremy Lane, who's one of their slot corner guys. So I just think that Seattle, if they're gonna get beat, I think they're gonna get beat by those big 3 guys, Nelson and Cobb and Adams. I don't think it's gonna be Richard Rodgers coming out of nowhere. Who knows? He may have like a big catch in the end zone, but I don't think that's a good thing to bet on.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? I think there's one thing that I'm excited about this game, and it's just the fact that we get to see Rodgers and the Packers against Seattle. That was kind of the matchup that personally I was rooting for, and I'm glad that we got that. All due respect to the Cowboys and I don't know, the Panthers, I guess. So we are talking with Pete Damilatis, who on Twitter at PFF_Pete, transitioning to the AFC. For the 4th time in 6 years, the Ravens and Patriots met in the playoffs. The Patriots just kind of punted on trying to run the ball and instead threw the ball 50-plus times in this game. What do you make of their decision to go to such an extreme, and what would you expect them to try to exploit in the matchup against the Colts?
Yeah, I think that the Baltimore and no one ever goes this extreme, so it was pretty shocking to see them not even try out. I think their last handoff to running back happened with about 1 minute left in the first half, so it was pretty shocking. But it's going to be tough for the Patriots to run on that Baltimore front, and Brandon Williams and Hallam not in there. I think they just realized that they almost kind of were able to bypass that front because they used their short passes as a running game. So 33 of Brady's 50 passes were within 10 yards to the line of scrimmage. So a lot of it was getting guys like Vereen or like Amendola on quick outs and crosses across the middle just to bypass that front that they had to get past. And then, and it also kept the heat off of Brady. The Ravens have 3 great pass rushers in Dumerville, McPhee, and Terrell Suggs, and they harassed Roethlisberger and pressured him on 40% of his passes, of his dropbacks the previous week, and Brady is only 28%. So I think that the Patriots were smart to do that. I don't think they're going to do that this week just because of how much success they've had against the Colts. I think they've run for 480 yards against them in the last 2 meetings, and you never know with Belichick. He, just because they ran it last time, he might just all of a sudden do something crazy. But I just think that it's just too juicy a matchup for them not to run the ball a ton and not be a little more balanced than they were last week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting with the kind of the dink and dunk passing game. We've had guests before who talk about how maybe those types of passes should almost be reclassified in a way since they're kind of an extension of the run game. Just kind of an interesting thought there. But looking at the Colts, obviously they beat the Broncos last week in Denver, but it's almost a little bit tough to imagine them going to New England and winning, given, like you said, how they've played them in the past. But at the same time, if you go back to 2012, the Colts are actually 12-0 versus opponents they've played previously in the same season. Does that mean anything to you? And what are your thoughts on the Colts as they head to Foxborough this weekend?
Yeah, that's an amazing stat. 12-0 against. It's like well, they're Pagano must be doing something right. They're finding kind of the secret the first time around. But then also it becomes a little less impressive when you realize that 9 of those 12 wins are against the Jaguars and the Titans and the Texans. So some of it might be schedule related. I think that's certainly. Like I mentioned before, I think they're greater than the sum of their parts, and that's a big testament to their coaching. So, I think that they're going to have a better game plan than earlier this season when they kind of didn't hang with the Patriots at all. I think if they're going to pull off the upset, they're going to have to run the ball more than they did in that first time. I think they had 19 yards rushing. Ahmad Bradshaw got hurt, and then they were stuck with Trent Richardson in the fourth quarter, so it's not like he was going to turn things around. But I think they want to rely on Boom Herron a little more. He's been a good revelation for them, and he struggles in pass protection a lot. So you don't want to have him back there trying to protect Andrew Luck while he's chucking it around 50 times a game. So I think that they're going to have to stay committed to the run. It's just going to be really tough for them to slow down that Patriots offense. I think the Rob Gronkowski had a solid game against them, and he looked like a man amongst boys on his touchdown catch against them. And I just don't think they have anyone, or they've found a way to slow him down since then. So I just think it's going to be really tough for the Colts. And they've got some good guys back there. Avonte Davis is a great cornerback. Belichick knows how to just avoid those kinds of guys. Davis stays on the right. They're going to attack probably Greg Toller on the left and have a lot more success against him. And I just think it's a really tall order for the Colts to pull off this upset.
I tend to agree with you, but I do think that a big factor in them pulling off that upset will be how they choose to defend the Colts wide receivers. It's always hard to predict what Belichick might do, and we all try to apply our logic on how we might deploy Revis and Browner. But how do you think the Patriots try to defend T.Y. Hilton, Moncrief, and the tight ends?
Well, it's interesting because last time they had Bill Belichick raved about Reggie Wayne heading into the game. And he wasn't lying because he had Darrelle Revis basically shadow Wayne for most of the game. And Revis shut him down. But I don't know, looking last week at how the Broncos, they put Aqib Talib on T.Y. Hilton, and they had Chris Harris shut down Wayne or the corpse of Reggie Wayne, who's as it's looked like for the last 2 weeks. And T.Y. Hilton just burned Aqib Talib for a number of big games and big penalties. So I feel like it'd be a waste for the Patriots to go out, get Darrelle Revis, invest as much in him, and then in the biggest game of the season, put him on an old wide receiver that looks like a shell of himself. I just don't think they're going to have Revis shouting Wayne. I really believe they're going to put him on Hilton, even though Hilton didn't even have a good game against them last time. I just think that they're going to put Revis on Wayne. I think they tried to put Brandon Browner on Kobe Sweener, and that was a disaster. Maybe they might switch it up and try a guy like Arrington on him instead, and put a guy like Browner on Moncrief. But I just think that's going to be Wayne on Hilton, and Belichick's going to make sure Hilton can't beat him. And even if it means Kobe Sweener gets another 100 yards, you'd rather have Kobe Sweener getting 10, 15 yards on you than T.Y. Hilton burning you for a 70-yard touchdown.
Yeah, I think that probably follows the most logical sequence. What maybe is not exactly logical is what the Broncos did this last week, clearing house after another playoff run that fell short. And I think some of it is the organization has championship aspirations and didn't feel that John Fox and his staff could get them there. But what do you think that they can do realistically this offseason to make the Super Bowl next year?
I think number one is Peyton Manning has to come back. I don't know how Elway has to convince him, but I don't think they have a chance of winning the Super Bowl with Brock Osweiler or whatever free agent quarterback, like a Mark Sanchez you're gonna find out there. So I think that Peyton has to come back, and I think they have to re-sign Demaryius Thomas because he's the kind of receiver who, even when Peyton moves on, any quarterback's going to have success with the Demaryius Thomas. So he's going to be a key part of their team for years to come, I think. Julius Thomas, they might say goodbye to him, but we've also seen he has some injury issues, and I sometimes wonder too how much of it is Peyton Manning making him look a little bit better than he is. And honestly, I think what they probably have to do for the next coach is bring in a guy who can convince Peyton to let go of some of the control he has. And I think after watching this last playoff loss, I think Peyton's biggest strength is also his team's biggest weakness. He's a master of his craft. He controls everything. He basically runs the practices himself. The downside of that is when he has an off game, there's just no one there to pick him up. I think I think back to the Colts playing the Patriots last year in the divisional playoff. Tom Brady, the Patriots rolled that game, and Brady, I think he had something like 150 yards passing. Garrett Blount rushed for 200 yards. The Patriots defense was all over the place and just completely shut the Colts down and made Luck throw a bunch of turnovers. And you just don't see many of those games for Peyton where if he's off, the team seems to be done right off the bat. And I think if you get a strong-minded coach in there that kind of takes a little bit of power away from him, is like, we're going to run it with C.J. Anderson a little more. We're going to build around the offensive line, focus more on run blocking. Then he could have maybe an Elway-esque end to his season where, he's not the focal point of the offense, but he's still a big contributor, and he lets someone else do the heavy lifting for once. And maybe that's kind of what they need to get over that hump, because right now, leaving it all on Peyton just hasn't worked out.
All right, Pete, one final question. Which Super Bowl matchup do you most want to see?
As tempting as it is to see, Rodgers versus Brady or Andrew Luck versus Russell Wilson, and who's the best quarterback of that 2012 class, I really just want to see the Patriots versus Seahawks from a scheme perspective. You have on one side, you have Bill Belichick, who's the ultimate game planner. Every week he's going to throw something different at you. He's going to come out with 4 offensive linemen. He's going to think of things that you've never thought of before, seen on a football field, and he's going to come out with a different scheme. And going up against the Seahawks team, who is kind of the exact opposite. They're, we've got a powerful running back. We've got a good running quarterback, and we're going to run the ball down your throat. And on the defensive side, we're going to play cover 1. We're going to play cover 3. We're not moving our guys around, but we're better than you are. Come at us and we'll beat you. And it's going to be fascinating to see. Hopefully, I'd love to see that matchup, because you have, the ultimate game planner versus the ultimate, just a group of talent. I can't remember last time I saw a team with such a collection of young talent that the Seahawks have right now. So, I think it's going to be an incredible game if it happens. So that's what I'm rooting for personally. Man,
you just sold me on that. That sounds so fun. Just like you said, it's the schemer versus the executor. Line up and do what you do. That was great stuff, Pete. Thank you so much for your time. You take care.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Please welcome to the show Shane P. Hallam, who you can find on Twitter at Shane P. Hallam. He is a fantasy football and NFL draft analyst and the president of DraftTV.com, as well as a proud Buckeye. Shane, how's it going?
It is going marvelously. I'll tell you that. Being a Buckeye alumni, I'm very happy this week with the result of the national championship. But even better, it's draft season now too. So I'm just in heaven.
Absolutely, man. This is an exciting time of year. So I guess just to get right into it, can you kind of walk us through like the last 48 hours or so of your life, centered around this national championship game, and maybe talk about a few of the performances that caught your eye?
Man, it was crazy just for us to get in there and be in the top 4 was a struggle, and I think going into that Big Ten championship game, a lot of us, myself included, thought the Buckeyes would win, but knew they had to win convincingly to even make the playoff. And then, I just wanted to get there. I'd rather have a chance to win than not. And I figured Alabama would at least beat Ohio State. Maybe it wouldn't be a butt whooping, but they would win, and that didn't happen. And then Oregon, it seemed like kind of the same deal. There was never a time when I was really excited or really felt like Ohio State was by far the better team. I think going back to the Tressel days from when I was there, I just remember in those game situations, I sat and was a student in those two national championships against Florida and LSU, and just watched the great Buckeye teams. I thought Ted Ginn returns the kickoff for a touchdown. I thought we were going to win 50-0 against Florida, and just watch them get beat. So to watch that national championship game and see Oregon just march down the field and score a touchdown and then open the game, I thought, here we go again. It's going to be the same thing. And then I was jumping around. I was excited. It was it was an emotional time because I wasn't sure. I started there after the 2002 national championship and really wasn't sure if I would see one since I've been a student at the university and then finally got my opportunity to do it. And it's a great game that I'm gonna have to go back and watch for draft purposes too. But I thought the Buckeyes really had some players under the radar that did some really good things. I mean, you could talk about a lot of the guys that aren't draft eligible or aren't expected to go in the draft, Ezekiel Elliott, et cetera. But I think one of the players that's underrated on that Ohio State squad is Jeff Hireman, the tight end. They didn't use a ton in the passing game, but they used in the blocking game a lot. And he was a player who's already flashed last year and the year before some pass catching ability. And in that national championship, I mean, he was a monster blocking. Oregon has two potential first rounders on their defensive line, and Eric Armstead and Buckley. So for him to actually step in there and take some of those guys one-on-one at certain situations, I thought helped his stock a lot. And on the defensive side, one of the unsung heroes of the Buckeyes defensive line was Michael Bennett, the defensive tackle, who's been one of the top senior defensive tackles, I think, in the country this season. But he's a good all-around player. Probably ideal as a 5-tech and a 3-4, but he got some penetration. He was collapsing the middle of the Oregon offensive line, and that was super important to keep that in. So I thought a lot of these kind of underrated Buckeyes, and I love Devin Smith, the wide receiver, didn't do a ton of the national championship game, but a great deep threat and a player I think is going to be heavily on the rise come draft season. So from an Ohio State perspective, I thought they had some players that really contributed that might not have been in the spotlight. And Oregon has a lot of seniors. They have, especially on the defense, they have a lot of guys leaving. And I think a lot of their big-time players did not play all that well. Byron Marshall had the big touchdown, and I think he's an intriguing guy as well. But, we'll get into that. I think both these teams are going to have a ton of players drafted this year.
Yeah, and one guy I'd just be, as a follow-up here, Cardale Jones. I mean, there's talk. Does he stay? Does he go? I mean, 3 games. I mean, what kind of sample size? Like, what do you make of a guy like that?
It's so hard to make that evaluation. I think during that game, when he got into his rhythm, was playing really well and showcasing his arm, the social media was abuzz with what could he be in the NFL in a weak quarterback class. I think Cardale Jones would be so hard to evaluate because he had 3 games with very few major flaws. You saw that he didn't have a full offense around him, full offensive game plan in any of those games. It's concerning, but I don't think he ever made huge mistakes or really bad reads or bad plays. He was patient in the pocket. He kept his eyes up down the field. He has the physical tools. So it becomes a very difficult evaluation. You take these 3 games against 3 really good opponents. I think with Wisconsin, Alabama, and Oregon, all 3 very good opponents. So it's not like he was playing in the first 3 games of the season when you're playing four teams. How do you take that? I think if he were to declare, I don't think he would. I don't think he should. I think he does need more experience. I think teams would be split. I think some teams would not even take a chance on a player that's only played 3 games in college. And I think a lot of teams would go back to the high school tape and see if they liked what they saw and see what they could gather from that. And in this quarterback class, I would be hard pressed to not put him in my top 4 quarterbacks. I really don't know after Winston, Mariota, and Hundley. I don't know if there's anyone with his type of upside, with that size, the arm strength, and playing in a big game, big situations like that. So I not that I would tell him to jump, but I think 3rd or 4th round is really with possibility just from a physical perspective.
Yeah, and it's almost like he can't even get that draft feedback. You know how a lot of the underclassmen do that, and then they see if they're first, second, or if they should come back. He came on too late to even do that. It's almost like Matt Jones, Matt Castle, just no college quarterbacking whatsoever, going to the NFL and trying to figure out what to make of him. But it's hard to imagine his stock going anywhere but down from here. But who knows what he'll do. One guy that I'm curious about and was just blowing up Twitter last night was Ezekiel Elliott. A lot of people saying, where do you rank this guy for the draft? That kind of thing, not realizing that he still has another year of eligibility before he can declare. Just hypothetically, though, if you were to try to stack him up against the Todd Gurleys and Melvin Gordons and the guys in the 2015 draft, where would you rank Ezekiel Elliott?
I think he would be right there with Melvin Gordon at the moment. I still would have Gurley, despite the injury, higher from a talent perspective. But I think Ezekiel Elliott and Melvin Gordon, two completely different running backs. I think he would be competing for that number 2 spot. I'd probably put him maybe a small step down below Gordon. I think Ezekiel Elliott, it's as if he dominated all season. It wasn't as if he was rushing for 2,000 yards, but in these big games, they relied on him. He was the crutch, and he did really well. The offensive line played well, but when you watch him run, when there's contact, he's always falling forward. He's very tough to bring down, and that's something you got to love. And let's not forget, he's only 19 years old. I mean, he looks like a man on the field, but he's a 19-year-old who just won the MVP of the national championship. So to me, there's a lot of physical development, and if he gets bigger and stronger and can still have the speed and the toughness that he has, the sky's the limit. He very easily could be the number 1 running back off the board in 2016.
All right, switching emphasis a little bit, another player who did not deliver in the bright lights of the national championship game. What is your take when it comes to Mariota? If you were managing the Bucs with the number 1 pick, are you happy about getting him? Are you scared? What are the pluses and the minuses when it comes to Mariota's game?
I think he's somewhere in the middle of that, where it's not like it's Andrew Luck, where you're thrilled to be in that spot and know that who you're taking right off the bat. I don't think that you're scared that he doesn't have what it takes to become a franchise quarterback, especially between the years. Everyone that's talked about him, from Chip Kelly to commentators that have sat down with him, says how bright and how well he knows the game, and that at the very core, it has to make you feel better that he's a hard worker and hopefully can adjust to different systems. But after watching that and seeing, hey, when a team's taking away the running options that you have, can he go back there, make things happen? Losing wide receivers, it had to be on his back, and he didn't get it done. He did, plain and simply. Now, it's more an evaluation than just one game. I still think that he can be a franchise quarterback if you mold your system around him. If Tampa Bay takes him and says, we're going to build our offense around him and what he does well and hide what he doesn't do well, then I think he absolutely can have a franchise quarterback that can be very tough to stop with his mobility, with the way he keeps his eyes up. One play in the national championship that I thought was incredible from him was in the red zone, where he's not very good. A throw to the back of the red zone was a high ball that was in a pretty tight window. The receiver went up and caught it, but got pushed out the back of the end zone. I mean, that was a great pass. It wasn't a touchdown. It ended up being a touchdown, but that was a great NFL pass, where if you have Calvin Johnson back there, if you have Mike Evans back there, that's probably going to be a touchdown. So to me, I think those type of plays make you feel good. The question is the fundamentals, the footwork, taking snaps from under center. How is he going to do when guys can pressure him on a consistent basis and he's not asked to get the ball out that quickly? You want to get Mike Evans down the field. How's that going to work out? So I'd be a little skeptical. I don't have him as my top quarterback in this class. I have Jameis Winston as my top. I still have Marcus Mariota as a top 5 prospect in this draft. But I think if you're Tampa at number 1, you have to look at both of these guys, and I think there's positives and negatives to both.
Okay, another guy from that offense who I think is really fascinating is Byron Marshall, and he's going to be the next in the long line of these prospects that's really hard to evaluate because he's not even 21 yet, and in 2013 he ran for 1,000 yards, and in 2014 he caught 1,000 yards. Do you have any thoughts on him from an NFL perspective?
He's a tough fit. He's a tough fit. He's one of those players, and he's one of those players on my board that I liked going into the year. He didn't have a bad year. As I said, he caught over 1,000 yards. But as I add guys and I watch more guys, it seems like I just keep putting players above him on my board, and he kind of falls down. Not that there's anything wrong with him. I don't know what's the best place to put him. He's in that Dree Archer, that Dexter McCluster type of spot where I can't play him at running back consistently. I don't think he can do that. Now, he's shown this year he can line up in the slot. He can catch the ball. I think it's going to help him a lot at the NFL level, and I think that's his best role is you put him out wide. You let him basically play wide receiver. I think if a team actually makes a full conversion for him to play wide receiver, that's what you're going to do. I think it could work out the best for him. And maybe you could find a way in some systems to I know that it's just a common platitude is Darren Sproles, right? Because he's used so well in New Orleans and Philadelphia this past year. If you can find a way to put Byron Marshall in position to catch screen passes, get things out in space, then he can do what he can do. But that's really tough to make those packages and have dedicated plays to a player who is as you said, so very, very young, has development to go, and sometimes that can be tough. So I would have fear taking him in the top 100, and ultimately I think in the third day you could swing for the fences with.
We're talking with Shane P. Hallam, who you can find on Twitter at Shane P. Hallam. So turning our focus a little bit more specifically towards the draft, can you share with us a little bit about your process for evaluating players? How do you go about your business, stay organized, etc.? And is there a certain position that you would consider to be your expertise?
Personally, for me, the position that I like the most that I attempted to play and failed miserably was wide receiver. That's what I like. In corner as well, though it's a tough evaluation if you don't have access to that all-22 a lot. And even wide receiver can be a little bit tricky, but I feel like I've done well with wide receivers and evaluating them and finding guys in the third, fourth round, the Mike Wallaces and that type of thing, and shying away from some of the bigger busts. So I feel like that's where I'm most comfortable. But it's the process for the draft and evaluating players. I don't think there's one way to do it. To me, it's just about compiling as many games as I can. I have a TiVo that records two games at once. I have two to three computers every Saturday that's recording games off ESPN3 or on a Sling box. If I can find the all-22, the FCC had some. I'm basically trying to record, and that happens from noon Eastern time all the way until about midnight. So it's 12 hours. So you're looking at 4 sets of games, and I'm trying to record 6 games at a time. So I usually end up over 20 to 30 games every Saturday, plus you add the ones during the week. So it compiles pretty quickly. So I still have a lot to do, to say the least.
Wow.
And
sounds intimidating. You're like, and I mean this in a very nice way, you're like a college football footage hoarder. Like, people are going to come in and have to, like, move over, old school reels and, film and stuff.
Yeah, let's say my girlfriend doesn't like it too much, but ultimately to me, it's just about trying to keep myself from getting burnt out. I'll go by team usually, especially the bigger teams. I'll try to go by team and hit a lot of the prospects there, but sometimes I feel like I want to watch offensive linemen today, and I'll do that. And I think the biggest thing with this is just not getting burnt out. If you actually try to watch everything, it's difficult. And then this year's probably been the most difficult year for me to get motivated and keep going, and that can sometimes be the toughest thing.
Mm-hmm. So getting to your specialty then, let's just assume for a second, because it's going to be hard to convince me otherwise, that Amari Cooper is the number one receiver in this class, or at least the one that people know the most about. Getting past him, who are the guys in that 2 to 5 range that you're most excited about?
I think this next tier is really good with a lot of different players. Devontae Parker right now with Louisville is my number 2. I just think he's a dynamic player when he came back from injury, where I think he's going to have an Odell Beckham type of rise. I guess that might be the wrong word to use, but where he's really going to move up into the top half of the first round because he can be a possession player. He can stretch the field. He can catch a screen pass. He does everything really, really well, and I think gets overlooked since Teddy Bridgewater left. He had an excellent second half of the year. And then I think past that, you have your bigger possession, jump ball type of receivers that need some fundamental work. Kevin White of West Virginia, Devin Funchess of Michigan, who I consider a receiver, and Jalen Strong of Arizona State. I think all three of those guys are very talented, have big hands, big physical bodies, can box out, go up for passes, all have fundamental issues, Funchess especially with his hands. I think Kevin White, in terms of route running, getting separation is not something he's strong at. I think Jalen Strong just is not the super athletic, super fast player with strong cuts, can be tough. So I think those players can easily develop in year one into starting NFL wide receivers, but definitely have some issues to that. And I could keep going because I think Nelson Aguilar of USC, Devin Smith I talked about, Sammy Coates of Auburn have some upside. I think there's some upside players in this draft. This receiver class not as good as last year. I mean, we saw the fruits of last year's labor, but this year's pretty darn good. And if you're Cleveland or Kansas City and you didn't come out of last year's draft with someone that you like, I think you're going to have a really good shot this year.
Well, speaking of upside, what do you make of Dorial Beckham-Green? Do you think he's a day 3 guy given the character concerns? What do you think about him?
I'll preface this by saying I don't know the extent of everything, but from what I've heard in terms of off the field and character concerns, it's almost as big as you can get. It's pretty close. So to me, I take that into account heavily. If I know it, or if I feel like I can play a part in that. And I think it's a tough thing about knowing where he's going to go. Because he could go in the first round if he checks out with teams. He could be undrafted if he really doesn't. The thing for me is I know he's an exceptional talent physically with his physical attributes, but when he did play, there's limited tape of him in Missouri. When he did play, it wasn't as if he dominated. I don't think he was a dominant college player. Now, it was very early in his career, and I think he would have developed into that. But it's not that he produced. It's not that he didn't get group separation. He wasn't great against the jam right going into college and dominating at the college level. So to me, you combine those things. You have a character concern. I haven't really seen him actually dominate as everyone says he's supposed to, or when you watch his high school games or high school highlights. So I think I would not take a chance until day 3, and I think he's well worth the shot, just like Isaiah Crowell probably should have been drafted somewhere for someone to take a shot. Same thing with DGB, but it's a big risk, and I would not take him in the first or second round.
All right, moving on to tight ends. What do you make of Max Williams? He seems to be everyone's sort of unanimous number 1 tight end, but is he really good, or did he benefit from being in a system that focused on the offense to the tight ends? Or if it's helpful, compare him to the 2014 tight ends, Safarian Jenkins, Ebron, Amaro. Where do you grade him compared to those guys?
I think he's really good. I think he is a very good player who has a lot of two-way upside. You know, he's very athletic, can catch the football real well, has some blocking upside to him. Reminds me a bit coming out, not as polished and not as productive as Heath Miller. So Heath Miller obviously was a first-round pick. I don't think Max Williams is quite to that level and still needs a little bit of work and refinement. I would put him in maybe the Safarian Jenkins type of grade in that early second round. I think you could get a slam dunk with Max Williams and find a two-way player that can block, that can catch, and be a red zone threat. Ebron went very high, I think too high, but Max Williams has a lot of those full components, and it's not a super strong tight end group, so the more that are declaring, the more I'm watching and liking it more than I have in the past. But Max Williams, I think, is definitely the cream of that crop.
Okay, and finally, running backs. Who is the must-know rookie running back for 2015? The guy who's going to get drafted, is immediately going to start making an impact and become fantasy viable right away. And then also, who is a running back who's going to be something like maybe Trey Mason or Crowell was this last year, who's flying under the radar, but has a pretty good chance to also make an instant impact?
I'll give you a couple names. I think the guy to know past the Gurley and the Gordons is Kevin Coleman, running back from Indiana, who was dominant, over 2,000 yards rushing in Indiana this past year, and he was their whole offense. Defenses knew going in they're going to run Kevin Coleman, They're going to throw the ball to Tevin Coleman. They did, and he still ran for 2,000 yards. He still scored a 90-yard touchdown on the Buckeyes. He's a really good player who can block, who can catch, who can run, who's tough, and I think he's an immediate contributor at the NFL level. Under the radar, one big school name, Malcolm Brown from Texas. He's playing in the Shrine game this week. Is extremely athletic, very versatile. He kind of wallowed when Mac Brown was there and things were going downhill, but had a great season. And he's one of those dynamic players. You mentioned Trey Mason. I think he compares similarly to what he can do if given a shot. Teams might be a little unwilling early, might give him a shot. And then the small school name to me is David Johnson from Northern Iowa, who's a very productive player, big, tough, physical, a mauler type. I think he's really going under the radar, going to be at the Senior Bowl this year and open some eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Shane, obviously you're really enthusiastic about the draft. You have drafttv.com. Can you tell us a little bit about that, what we can expect to see from you in the coming months, and then we will let you go.
Absolutely, drafttv.com. You can check it out. My kind of thought process was I don't like reading long articles and things, so drafttv.com simplifies that. I do a lot of video work on there in terms of talking about fantasy teams and scouting reports. I have the rankings and mock drafts, very, very edible chunks, if you will, that you can kind of take in. And then if you want the long articles, I'm actually writing those this year over at fanspeak.com as well. So lots to like. At the underclassmen deadline, I'll have a top 100 done, rankings done, mock draft done, and all the usual fun stuff.
Awesome. Great stuff, Shane. Thank you so much for your time. We'll be in touch.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Rotoviz Radio. Be sure to subscribe to the show through your favorite podcast directory. Also, if you're on iTunes, be sure to stop by and let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating and a review. Finally, be on the lookout for next week's episode featuring Chris Stuber, who will share his extensive experience being in the front office of the Arena Football League. You won't want to miss it. We'll catch you next week.